Hello everybody, my name is Deepak Uttamchandani and I have the honor of being the primary guest editor for a forthcoming special issue of the JSTQE. The title of this issue is OMNS 2015 and OMNS stands for Optical, Micro and Nano-Systems. Now, the actual details and full scope of the OMNS special issue can actually be found on the IEEE JSTQE website. So there is a comprehensive document that's been printed out and it explains to all potential contributors what the topics and areas for papers are. So I would ask you to turn your attention to the website and find out more about the actual details that we are seeking. The OMNS issue has been around for a few years. The most recent occurrence of that issue was back in 2009 as within volume 15 of the JSTQE, and in fact before that it was in 2007, which was in volume 13 of the JSTQE. So I think you'll all recognize that it's been a good few years since OMNS had an issue devoted within JSTQE, and so next year 2015 we hope to address that very issue. So what I would like to do is to also say something about the connection between the OMNS issue and a series of IEEE conferences that have been held now for something like 17 years. This has been the IEEE Optical MEMS conference, which started life as Optical MEMS, but over the last 8-9 years the letter N was added, so it became OMN, and that stands for Optical, MEMS and Nano-Systems. Now this series of conferences has been going on for 17 years, and this year in 2014 we had the privilege of bringing this conference to the city of Glasgow, which is where I'm based, and in fact it was run from my university, which is the University of Strathclyde. In fact, just here I have a copy of the proceedings of that conference, and what has in fact inspired me to get involved with the JSTQE was that very conference. And it seemed to me a good idea that from the very high quality of submissions which we obtained for that conference, to see if we could invite some of the contributors of the papers to further expand on their papers and submit their expanded papers to the OMNS 2015 issue. So I discussed this prospect with the current editor-in-chief of JSTQE, and after some discussion and some further consultation, it was deemed a good idea to proceed. So we have therefore the OMNS 2015 issue connected, but not very strongly connected, with the OMN 2014 conference. And what I mean by that is that as part of the guest editorial team who are managing and overseeing the OMNS issue, 2 members of that editorial team are connected to and were technical program committee members of the OMN conference held in Glasgow, but 2 other members of the editorial team were not. And in doing it that way, it seemed to me that this was a fair way of ensuring that there weren't only going to be submissions from the conference to the journal, but that we had other editorial team members who could help solicit papers from a wider group of potential authors. So it would seem appropriate then at this point to introduce who the remaining editorial team is. And I would like to first of all introduce Joyce Poon. Her focus with this issue will be to concentrate on the nanophotonics angle of the submissions. Joyce graduated with her PhD from Caltech back in 2007, and she's currently employed and has been since 2007 at the University of Toronto. Her research interests are in integrated photonics, micro and nanophotonics, optical modulators, and therefore her work, as you can tell, is very deeply connected to the scope and an area of optical micro and nanosystems. When I spoke to her some time ago and we were discussing what we thought the hot topics could be for this particular issue, in her mind the area of optical micro and nanomechanical systems, the micromechanics, nanomechanics, that aspect of it, the optomechanics in short, were in her view a very, very hot topic, one of great excitement. One of the things we talked about was to think back and think, what did we think were our best moments in photonics? So when I posed this question to Joyce, she thought back and she told me that when she was a second-year undergraduate student doing a research project, a summer research project, she was given the task of aligning a laser cavity, aligning a laser system, and when she, as part of that activity, just the whole business of aligning it and bringing a laser cavity into alignment and getting the laser emission was one of her, if you like, wow moments, one of her best moments. And I think that is certainly something that inspired her to carry on with photonics. The second guest editor we have is Mark Sorel. He's from the University of Glasgow, which is just some 2.5 kilometers from where I'm sitting right now. And he graduated from the University of Pavia in Italy in 1999. And his area of interest, technical interest, are in integrated optoelectronics, semiconductor lasers, and in silicon photonics. So once again, he is a very appropriate guest editor for this special issue. And in his mind, when we talked about hot topics, he felt that the dense integration of multifunctional optical nanosystems, basically the idea of keeping up with an optical equivalent of Moore's law, was a very, very hot, a very, very topical research field, and this is where some of his own activity is currently focused. And we are again looking for contributors to to submit papers in that topic as well. When I talked to him about his best moments in photonics, he again thought back and remembered that when he was working with integrated optics, he built his an optical waveguide, but designed and fabricated an optical waveguide, and he coupled light into it, and just the scattered light and the stripe of light that propagated through the waveguide was something that that remains with him, and it's certainly something that was very memorable. So those are his interests in silicon photonics and dense integration. The third person of the editorial team is Dr. Hiroshi Toshiyoshi from the University of Tokyo. Now, he worked with me in the OMN 2014 conference that was held just a few months ago. He was one of the technical program committee members. He graduated from the University of Tokyo in 1996, and he has in fact been employed at Tokyo since that time, except for a 2-year spell between 1999 and 2000, or 1999 and 2001 I should say, which he spent at the UCLA. His interests are in laser scanning systems, in optical coherence tomography, that's OCT, in terahertz tunable filters, and in general optical MEMS devices and optical MEMS for astronomical instruments. So once again, his focus is perhaps more on the micro side of that divide, and he has been a great contributor to this field for very many years. In his mind, a lot of the important topics in the future of optical MEMS and nanophotonics will be in the area of biomedical diagnostics. So he feels that biomedical diagnostics is a great area where this field can actually grow and contribute. When I asked him to think about his kind of wow moment, there was not a single moment that stood out in his mind, but he felt that the general migration from radio technology to from radio technology to photonic technology for for communication, for the operation of the internet, these areas he felt were very, very important. The final person to perhaps introduce in slightly greater depth is myself. So I am Deepak Uttamchandani, as I said. I head the Center for Microsystems and Photonics here at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow. Glasgow is in the west of Scotland. My own area of interest are in optical MEMS, varifocal devices, MEMS arrays for laser systems, generally free space optical MEMS and their applications. And I graduated from the University of London, the University College London, back in 1985. That was when I was doing my PhD. So my own areas that I think are hot topics actually coincide with some of the previous talks. It's this whole idea of nanophotonics integration, how to transmit a single bit by using the lowest power of lowest available electrical power. So this whole idea of bit transmission via nanophotonics integration, I do believe to be very, very strong. And also the idea of micromechanically and nanomechanically integrated devices and tunable devices, using micromechanics and nanomechanics to tune the performance of a device, alter its wavelength characteristics, its transmission characteristics. It's also something which I believe is of great importance. I have actually two wow moments with optical MEMS, and the first of these was many years as an early postgraduate researcher, when I was working on acousto-optics and acousto-optomechanics, and the idea there was to focus a modulated laser beam onto a mechanical structure, in fact a MEMS diaphragm, and I chose a frequency that was within the audio range of human hearing. And to my great surprise and delight, when I focused a laser beam modulated at an audio frequency onto a miniature MEMS diaphragm, I could actually hear the single frequency, the pure tone, as the optical energy was finally converted into acoustic energy via a thermal and mechanical intermediary steps. So that was really great. The other memorable moment for me is when we designed one of our very first scratch drive actuators. Those of you who know about this will remember that these are small scale actuators which have nanoscale movement capability. So you could call them nanoscale actuators. And designing one from scratch and seeing it operate in the lab was something I remember very well. So that tells you something about the editorial team. What I thought might be worth doing also was to tell you something about the types of papers that we are seeking, but perhaps more the type of papers that we're not seeking. Quite often contributors send in their manuscripts only to find that at the point of arrival their manuscripts are very quickly read over and returned to them because they're deemed to be unsuitable for the publication. And in our case, that has happened in 3 or 4 instances over the last few months as submissions have come in. And what I would like to ask contributors to think about is that submitting papers which have purely theoretical content, where in fact a different type of computational methodology has been implemented to perhaps speed up the arrival of a result, or a purely theoretical paper which tends to be which at this stage are difficult to verify and validate in a practical sense. These types of papers, the editorial team decided were not what we were looking for. So yes, by all means, submit some theoretical work, but what we ask you to do is to please submit your theoretical work in the context of some experimental work, just so that we have submissions which are not entirely theoretical based. There are, I'm sure you'll all agree and know, many other routes to publishing purely theoretical and modeling work, but this particular issue of the JSTQE, we feel invites theoretical work, but in the context of some validation by experimental techniques, or where there is some genuine demonstration of something, of some theoretical research that is completely novel, perhaps unexpected. So I would ask potential authors to think about that as they plan their submissions. The JSTQE, as you know, is a journal which is very, very well respected. It has an impact factor. Its most recent impact factor is 3.47, and for the type of papers that it solicits, that type of impact factor is a very, very respectable figure, indicating very clearly how significant this journal is within the wider photonics community. So we do, in order to maintain such high factors, the quality of contributions that eventually appear in JSTQE is very important, and it's important from everyone's perspective, the Photonics Society, the authors themselves, that only the best and the highest quality manuscripts make their way into the journal. So we, of course, are dependent as an editorial team. We're dependent entirely on the recommendations that come to us from the reviewers. And the reviewers have a tough task to do. They often have short timescales within which to produce a thorough and rigorous review of articles. But we insist and make sure that all reviews are done thoroughly. And the editorial team have agreed that what we should do is to work as closely as we can with potential or with authors who have actually contributed papers, and to make sure that where reviewers are making certain points, that we can make sure that these points are translated and transferred accurately to the contributors. So we recognize that contributors spend a lot of time devoting time to writing good manuscripts. Sometimes the reviews that come back are not positive in the sense that the contributors would like, and we as editorial team members are there to help mediate in the process, to try to work with contributors to make sure that their papers reach the relevant high standards of the JSTQE and indeed all of the IEEE Photonics Society's publications. So I would like to ask all contributors to bear that in mind. Sometimes papers don't quite reach the level we reach, but we do our very best as guest editors to make sure that contributors rather understand why particular decisions have been made. Finally, what I'd like to do is to say something about invited papers. We have for OMNS 2015, we're seeking solicited contributed papers, but there are also a number of authors whom we have directly approached and invited them to make contributions. There are around 15 people that fall into that category at the moment, 15 people who have agreed to contribute. Now, of course, it would be not appropriate for me to divulge details of that just now, bearing in mind that all invited papers are also reviewed in the same way as the regular contributed papers. But I would just say to you that the issue, we hope, will be very successful. There will be a balance of invited papers from some of the top researchers in the field, and these will be mixed in with contributed papers from some of the top other universities working in the field of OMNS. The mechanics of the operation is that as papers get reviewed and finally accepted, they get uploaded onto the JSTQE website. And indeed, there are already a few papers which are intended for this issue, which have already been uploaded on the website, and they can be seen there. And then as we move into next year, and as the deadline for closure approaches, what will then happen is all the accepted papers will be brought together, grouped together, and published as that special issue. So this is an ongoing process. I want to remind everyone that the submission deadline is not very far away. It is in fact the 1st of October, which is some 21 days, 3 weeks away. So if you are intending to submit a manuscript, please be mindful of the deadlines, and it is not normally the process to extend the deadlines. So please make sure you're aware of all the timelines involved. Okay, so I think I will wrap up my presentation then. I've covered with you the general scope of the issue. I've given you a little historical perspective of this particular topic, OMNS, as it connects to the JSTQE. I've said a little about the editorial group, and I've said something about links between the special issue we have and the OMN series of conferences, which have been running for 17 odd years now, in fact slightly more than that. And from now on we will await your further submissions, and we look forward to having a successful issue. Thank you.